All right. Uh, with 1 minute past the top of the hour, we bring you the live conversation today from Speak Up Africa and Kenya Union of Gig Workers. My name is Wendy Lois. I am the moderator for this evening. And together with me, I have two panelists. Allow me to introduce them so that we can begin the conversation now. I have Mr. Verick Singh, who is the coordinator of AI and Digitalization from International Labour Organization. He is coming live to us from Geneva. Thank you so much. He has had various roles in the organization and worked under different capacities. We'll bring him in and he'll be able to tell us more of that. He has worked in South Asia and also India. Mr. Verick, thank you so much for being here with us this evening. Jambo from Kenya. And we also have Madam Linda Bonyo, who is the founder Lawyers Hub, which is a digital law organization working on artificial intelligence policy in Africa. Madam Linda, thank you for making time to be here with us this evening. Fantastic. We will be having this conversation for about an hour. We want to unpack the realities of our gig economy. How does that look like? Because here in Kenya, we have about a workforce of about 1.2 million and counting. That is a large group of people that we are seeing and interacting with every day. I mean, the gig workers are people we have engagements with at least every other hour in our lives, and especially here in African democracies. They contribute majorly in our economy. And I think without wasting much time, I will bring you on board. You can do a quick introduction and then we get right into the questions. Madam Linda, I will start with you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. My name is Linda Bonyo, and I've worked on digital policy for several years, since 2017. I've been working on several issues that concern digital labor, but also broadly on AI policy. I also work on data governance. I sit on the UN body CSTD working group on data governance. And I hope that we'll be able to share more on how we can better arm ourselves with better information. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mr. Verick.
Well, thank you very much, Wendy. It's a real pleasure to be with you today to discuss some very important issues. As already said, my name is Sher Verick. I am the coordinator at the ILO on AI and Digitalization. And, you know, as you all know, there are very important implications for the labor market and is a key priority for the work we have here at the ILO and for our member states such as Kenya. So good to be with you.
All right, fantastic. So I guess a good place to start the conversation would be with you, Mr. Verick. From African democracies, from our own country, we are seeing many governments and international bodies racing to develop AI policies. I think in the many conversations that I have, both online and offline, I tell people that AI is the new you and I, you know, as much as it started a long while ago. But we are seeing the race to develop many AI policies and frameworks. From where you sit at the ILO, how would you characterize the current global state of AI governance?
Yes, thanks for this question. Indeed, we're seeing, you know, around the world and also the global level, a lot of action in terms of different initiatives for AI governance and AI policy. I mean, just, you know, I'm going to mostly comment on what we're seeing at the national level around the world, but obviously globally, there's been some important milestones in recent years, most notably the adoption of the Global Digital Compact in 2024. And we have a number of follow-up activities there for the UN system and member states. You know, most relevant would be the Global Dialogue on AI Governance that's going to take place in July of this year in Geneva. Of course, at the ILO, there are a number of activities going on that have a global perspective, including, some of your members will know, and participants on this webinar will know that there is a standard setting process going on at the ILO in terms of decent work in the platform economy that will come up for the second discussion in June. But let me say a few more specific things about the national level, because indeed many countries have adopted national AI policies. And in fact, our own analysis of them tell us that they started around 2017 in countries like Canada, China, but in the ensuing years, we now have almost half of all member states having an AI strategy or policy. So there's a bunch of other countries working on them currently. So it's a really big ticket item for many governments, where they all see in particular how fast AI is evolving and the need for policy. But I would stress, looking at national AI policies and strategies, they do have some labor market components, but they tend to focus very much on job quantity issues around, jobs in a narrower sense. They tend to look at, human capital development, skills, etc., and also some of the use of AI within the public sector. But what we see generally around the world in AI policies, that a number of key dimensions for decent work are missing in terms of job quality and working conditions, reference to the need for social protection, labor market policies, etc., but also the role of social partners, trade unions, employee organizations, and vulnerable groups. So, and this reflects, of course, most of the AI policies are being driven by ministries of digital transformation in most countries. So there is an important opportunity to bring some of those elements together when we're looking at the role of AI policy. I'll stop there, but thanks for that opening question.
Yeah. That was quite an unpacking, and a bit that we will be coming back to. But allow me to bring Madam Linda into the conversation. And you've had a webinar series of Lawyers Hub webinar series, and I think you've been able to track how the progress has been made in the different African democracies that we've had. And from your perspective, what are some of the important lessons that Kenya should be drawing, and if at all, mistakes that we should avoid? Because later on in the conversation, we'll be seeing how some of these policies are being made, but some of the key players who are in the market itself are not being involved. So how are other African countries approaching AI policies, important lessons that we can draw, and most importantly, mistakes that we avoid?
Excellent. Thank you so much for the introduction and, Verick's comments, setting the stage on the Global Digital Compact, which was very important, emanating from the UN General Assembly. So I want to encourage as many digital workers as possible to show up at the UN General Assembly. There's very many side events in September in New York that feed into the conversation. So it's just not for policymakers. A lot of us go there and try to get into the spirit of the discussions and the negotiations that are happening. Also at the African Union level, when there's the annual convening in Addis in February, it's important that your voice is there. I say this as somebody who's been part of these processes. I've spoken at the UN General Assembly. At the African Union, I was on the working committee that drafted the Africa Data Policy Framework, but also I'm on the African Union AI working group. So what that means is, if you're not on the table, you're on the menu. So if you don't get there and get your voices heard, chances are you are not going to be considered in any given way. And so we are seeing this with also national policies and national AI strategies. So every Monday at 12 o'clock Kenyan time, we discuss different national AI strategies. So this past week, we did discuss the Ghana strategy that was launched last week, Friday. And one of the things that we've been seeing, we've done this for Zimbabwe, for South Africa, for Kenya with the AI bill. One of the things that we see is institutional frameworks are very important. You need strong institutions to actually make sure that workers' rights, especially digital workers, are actually protected. So we see, for example, in Zimbabwe and in South Africa, they introduced an institution called, they have an ombudsman, which Kenya has. But now they are saying they need an AI ombudsman. An ombudsman or an ombudsperson is where you go to complain about any government process. Okay? So for example, you want to understand transparency issues, that how does this AI work? So the Office of the Ombudsman is a great person to actually do this. Some universities in Kenya, for example, I began my career at Jomo Kenyatta University. They already had an ombudsman years, ago, I think like 15 years ago. So that's really important. So institutions are important. Number two, we're seeing a trend where there are funds that ideally can protect you from these harms. So, for example, the South African AI policy, even though it was withdrawn this past week by the minister, one of the things that it was introducing was an AI fund, a compensation fund, so that if you are harmed by AI, you can ideally apply for this fund that you are sort of compensated by the government. So that's some of the things that we're seeing in terms of new institutions. Strengthening human rights institutions like the Kenya National Commission of Human Rights. That's the approach that Zimbabwe had taken. But on the other side, make sure that people are actually funded for when they suffer the harms. The problem with digital workers across Africa is that none of these policies address the digital workers. Yesterday, there was an interesting declaration by African ministers convened by the UN. And one of the things that was being discussed was on digital worker rights. I was part of that process. And I mentioned that explicitly because I see the problem. But I want to urge you to organize so that you can be in these policy spaces.
All right. Linda, you talk about South Africa and other African democracies that we have. And we would want to narrow down this conversation to our country, Kenya. And we would definitely not want our forefront leaders in the space of gig economy to be on the menu, but to be on the table. Do we have any African countries that have had their worker protections right in their frameworks correct in their representation? And if at all, what are some of the frameworks they have that we can emulate as a country?
I would say that we are not doing very well as a continent, and I would want to say we've been tracking how big tech companies are actually working in the continent. We know the stories of big tech companies coming into Kenya, and when they're faced with accountability issues, they move to another country. So we've seen this with, for example, Meta moving their content moderation from Kenya into Ghana. And if you look at Ghana's AI strategy, it is very gentle on big tech companies. It does not punish them for the things that they're doing, and actually saying their strategy is the first one in the continent that names these big tech providers and say, we are opening our country to NVIDIA, to Meta, to OpenAI, very clearly. But from South Africa's draft, they were clear that as a foreign organization, you will come in, you must abide by the standards that we actually setting up. Kenya had an issue. Kenya already was saying we want foreign workers. Within our national strategy, it says that Kenya will make it easy for foreign workers in AI to actually come in and work. And so Kenya has been considered like a foreign, platform. It will favor foreign organization before it favors its own workers, which is not great. If you look at the work standard across Europe, there are measures in which ideally you will protect these digital workers. What workers are asking for are very, their everyday life. If I'm doing content moderation, I actually need psychosocial support. Number two, if, I lose my job, I need compensation. I need to be paid before, I need notice. Our Labor Act is very clear on what our worker rights look like, but they seem to be exempt for tech companies. And I think we just need to look at squarely, without dancing around the bush, who is to blame for what digital, workers are going through. It's actually the big tech companies. It's unchecked monopolies, and the fact that billionaires have too much money, and we're trying to figure out how do we go against billionaires to make sure that workers are not extinct.
Yeah, important things you highlight. Mr. Verick, there are issues of who compensates who. When AI causes harm to workers, then how is that compensation done? And this conversation highlights significant gaps that are there. Because then I guess we are still playing catch up, if at all we even have an understanding of the space. Mr. Verick, what significant gaps do exist in some of the AI policies when it specifically comes to the workers?
Yeah, so I think Linda's raised a number of important issues there. I mean, and I think I would stress also, and she as a stressing the need for representation. Obviously for the ILO, very critical is the role of social dialogue in the process of policy formulation, regulatory change as well. So having workers and employers in that process is absolutely critical. I mean, I won't speak specifically about compensation gaps. I mean, it really depends on the legal context. But I will say, as I mentioned before, in our own review of national AI policies, now we do see a strong focus on some elements, as I mentioned earlier. So the labor market impacts are referred to. Skilling, so human capital skilling is seen as a critical part of AI policy, which I think we all agree with. We need to look at the implications of new technologies for different types of skills. And we're not only talking about the demand for AI and digital skills, we're also talking about a whole bundle of skills that employers are looking for as technology changes. I mean, this has been historical fact as we've seen technological change for centuries. So skilling is important, and we do see it there in national AI policies around the world. As I also mentioned before, there is emphasis on the use of AI within government. So governments are pushing in labor administration, in employment services for job matching, etc. But what I did stress, and I will stress again, is that most policies are more silent on issues around job quality and working conditions. So if you look at the 88 or so countries that have national AI policies, we see much less on those dimensions. We also see less reference to other policies that are important to protect workers' rights and conditions, including the social protection policies, labor market policies, etc. And finally, as I just to reiterate, the central role of our social partners, worker representatives, employer representatives in this process tends to be missing as well in national AI policies around the world. So I mean, these are very important elements of what we call decent work. So I would just reaffirm the importance of looking at this, and so really the opportunity there is how do you bridge that gap between what is typically dealt with by ministries of labor and ministries of technology, and how do we establish much closer interministerial mechanisms drawing from the critical role of social partners as well in that process. And I think here it's also about the application of existing laws as well to protect workers. Of course, then the key issue becomes, what are the gaps? I mean, this is also a global issue. So ILO already has a big toolkit of international labor standards, for want of a better word, that apply to the workplace and to apply to the labor market in terms of promoting decent work. So, for example, on OSH, occupational safety and health. So one has to really also look at that from a global perspective and national, to what extent national regulations are applicable and will address those issues as they emerge with technological change. At the same time, I think we all recognize the potential for gaps within those systems. So it's important to see where those gaps are. And ultimately, implementation is everything in policy. I worked for a long time, as you mentioned in the introduction, in South Asia, working on employment policies and working with governments and social partners on that. And I'm very much aware of the importance of ensuring that we also have strong implementation, not just policies on paper, but ensure that those policies are being translated into action, with the right interministerial setups within government, with the right involvement of social partners, and the right funding mechanisms ensure these, these policy and strategies translate into results. Thanks.
All right. Even as we continue the conversation, I will be doing a bit of housekeeping just to ensure that we all still are on the same page. I think for my two speakers, you can nod and confirm that you can hear me clearly. Fantastic, because we will be taking feedback from some of the audiences that we have. And for the rest of the team that is backstage, continues to run smoothly. Mr. Verick, I would want us to pivot a bit, because we are talking about being able to bridge the gaps that are there. One end of that spectrum is the discourse that is being had in the public about job losses. Many workers get into bad predicaments where you just woke up, and because of the conditions that are set there already, because of discriminatory feedback or whatever, you are laid out of work and now you're jobless. And the other end of that spectrum is the conversation around having quality of work, wages, better conditions, and rights that matter. Do we have any evidence that can speak to how AI is already reshaping job quality for workers, and particularly for platform workers in the gig economy?
Yeah, thanks. Indeed, if you look at headlines around the world, the focus often is that AI is coming and to destroy jobs. So, and this is more broadly, it's not specifically about platform economy, platform workers, but in general, you see this headline around the world. And I mean, this is not a new phenomenon in terms of that type of fear. We saw that 10, 15 years ago when there was fear about automation, more in line with robotics. And we see that earlier during the Industrial Revolution. So in some respects, this fear is quite natural to think our jobs will disappear because of new technologies. And we're very much seeing that with AI, with predictions every other day saying this amount of jobs will go. But I would stress, and this is, more broadly about the implications of AI, that, ILO's own estimates tell us that, yes, if you look globally, around 25% of employment globally is exposed, and this is now specifically about generative AI, but it gives you a benchmark of what we're talking about, is exposed to AI, but actually much more is likely to be transformed through those technologies. So, I won't go into the technical details. I mean, I can give you, refer to where we have all this information if listeners are interested to find out more. But the key message is that, so at the end, about 3.3% are more exposed to the automation that's happening through AI, but the rest are, more than 6 times that amount are potentially transformed. And transformed, but I'll come back to what does it mean to be transformed, because transformed is the bigger question. But I would just say, in terms of what we see then in these estimates, is that these figures are much higher in high income countries versus low and middle income countries due to the differences in the structure of the economy. So I think we should be clear on that as well, because it's not that every economy has the same structure or therefore the same effect of technology. And we also have to stress the importance of the digital divide. I mean, this is where the access to new technologies is not spread evenly across countries and across the world. So it doesn't play out the same way because of those digital divide issues. But indeed, I mean, let me then switch to the job quality angle, because that's from an ILO perspective, the bigger story, because and this is not generally picked up in those headlines, and it also going to this whole idea of transformation is actually the flip side of that, because the whole point of these new technologies is to improve productivity of workers. At the same time, improving productivity can have potentially, different types of effects on job quality. It can be positive or negative depending on what happens within the workplace. And this is a more general statement than specifically about the platform economy. But it's a flip side of increased productivity, right? So you want to make more out of out of a business model. The flip side is what happens to the jobs, and here, I mean, we had also an important report that came out last year about digitalization and AI in the workplace, looking at the implications for occupational safety and health. And here you can see that sort of dichotomy between both the opportunities and then some of the risks that emerge with new technology. And this is not only AI, but also with robotics, with the use of algorithmic management tools, etc. So it covers different technologies, and it really lays out, on the one hand, these new technologies can, of course, help improve workplace safety, right? I mean, if you're using a robot that a human had to use before this, you can protect a human from being hurt in that type of routine types of jobs. There's a reduction of hazardous tasks, keeping people away from, dealing with hazardous material. I mean, reduction of repetitive work potentially that some of these technologies can do. And, ultimately then have benefits for the job quality. But at the same time, we have to be, aware and look at what happens to human oversight. So often people talk about human in the loop, human in the lead, but if humans are not part of that process, then we have concerns. It also goes to the issues around accountability, around verification, and ensuring the whole process remains deeply rooted in a human-centered ethical approach. But a couple of other risks we see also outlined in the ILO report on OSH that came out last year was linked to issues, work intensification. So yes, work productivity can increase, but at the same time, what happens to work intensification? How intensely people have to work. We need to also consider what the implications are for social stress and also ergonomic stress if this becomes an issue. So I think bottom line is there are both opportunities and challenges that emerge with any new technology, and we have to be particularly aware and focus on those in order to see how we harness the opportunities, but also address some of those risks and challenges that emerge in the process.
All right, that's quite insightful and very packed. I would want to just throw it in that we are unpacking quite a lot, and I would want our audience to keep their questions noted very well. If you will be directing it specifically to either of our guest speakers this evening, please have the questions noted down, because I will be taking them up as we come to the culmination of the conversation, and then we'll be able to pick questions or responses and comments. Linda, I will come back to you and say, right now we are seeing Kenya is in the process of formulating its AI policy, and fundamentally gig workers are not included in this process. Earlier on in the conversation, we said it's one thing to formulate the policies, and it's another thing to implement the policies to help those it affects directly. But just before we get there, there's a significant gap that even the primary workers who actually are affected by AI directly are not represented in the process of formulating the policies. And this is a gap. So how do we come about this gap, even legally, for the people in the gig economy, to make them feel like they are heard, they are thought about, they are well represented? Because then the exclusion is a big discriminatory gap.
Yeah, I agree with you. Exclusion is not nice. Nobody wants to be excluded. But I also must say having done this work, and I was an outsider. I was not the Bar Association, but I was somebody who thought that law could work together with technology. I think that there is room for the strong to survive. Strong unionization, people coming together and getting to, to make sure that their voices are heard. I do have a few, comments as we proceed. I'm going to try to share something quickly on what I see as an opportunity, but then also, a challenge for all of us to think about. So I mentioned earlier when I said this, that if you're not in the room, you are actually in the policy. And I want to make it a little clear on what are the challenges that digital workers are going through. There is the global north challenge, what people are going through in Europe and the US. That's very different from what African digital workers are going through. So first of all, most of the Kenyan workers are going through algorithmic management, So we're still grappling with how do we define the gig economy, but also how do we define, for example, AI workers. There's no recognition of any of the platforms as a regulated category. So we still have to talk about who are these gig workers. I had this interview a few days ago, and this researcher asked me, so who is working in AI in Kenya? And they're very senior. And it broke my heart that they have no idea of who is this particular person. I like the fact that you described invincible workers, like the algorithms are the ones that are determining exactly what needs to happen to you. I think we need to talk about that asymmetry, but also we already have documented harms in Kenya, which we must continue to talk about it. The work that we do at the Africa AI Policy Lab, if you go to aipolicy.africa, you will see some of the documented AI labor harms that we've documented. There's this microtask workers that are earning less than, and I think Time Magazine did a really great job of showing what was actually happening in the continent. And these jobs are going to be automated. So I would say this, we must be loud in the policy. So what are you supposed to do? How do we get there? I think there needs to be a formal seat. I personally will try and make introduction to the people that are doing this AI policy locally in the country for, there to be some sort of synergy and to see where you can engage. But also there needs to be some risk classification. Kenya's AI bill, which the government has said that you should put in your comments by Monday next week, there's no risk classification in that bill at the Senate. So we sort of need to classify these algorithmic harms for workers as high-risk use case. We also need statutory sort of platform workers, and that is the work of Parliament that needs to go in. I'd also want to say that we need to audit these systems. South Africa, for instance, came up with the idea of workforce assessment. We do not have that in our particular law. That needs to happen. I also want to acknowledge the harms that you're going through as digital workers on surveillance. People are actually, being recorded. Voices are being used for things that you actually did not say yes to. You also still do not have any collective bargaining. You have no appeals process because you can't appeal all these things that are being done on the platform. You wake up and you find that you've already been removed on these particular platforms. Our labor laws at this point already provide for those particular issues where you are employees, but you have actually not been recognized whether you are employees or independent workers. I want to believe that there's opportunity for us to school other people so that they can join us and we can be able to fight this war together. And finally, I would want to say this. There's an opportunity for us to engage at two levels. One, with the team that is drafting Kenya's AI policy, but also with the team at Parliament that is actually taking current comments. Let's work together by Monday so that you make a submission to Parliament, really explaining why there is need for them to recognize digital workers, but also to look at issues of this algorithmic management of workers within the country, including the compensation. And my colleague here has talked about ILO and the condition of work and how much people are paid, what are the work conditions. These are things that we must look at and make sure that it's possible for us to work together. So I think that would be my my comments at this point. Thank you.
Oh, okay, before I let you go, and especially on that particular point, I would want us to build up on it a bit because Monday is about 4 days away. There's been a whole process that has had this significant extension. Realistically speaking, is there a pathway that we can have such conversations happening if at all we're still looking at then how do we quote unquote label this workforce? How do we recognize them? The labor laws are not recognizing them. Is there a pathway? Because you've mentioned that there are two ways that we can have inclusion in the conversation, and I would want you to put more emphasis on that. considering that you have union nows like Kenya Union of Gig Workers, which is KUGWO, that can meaningfully bring a difference and make a contribution to the policy that is already there, leave alone even the bill that is at Senate? Is there realistic time and pathways for the contributions to be had?
I think there is, and I'm not being just optimistic. The Lawyers Hub has been sending comments to Parliament on digital related issues, and we have seen the response. They call us for the committee meetings when we make the submissions, and they do public hearings. On whether they hear us or not, do they take what we said seriously? Does it end up in the law? That's debatable, and that's an opportunity to actually audit what public participation has been in the country. But I would say this: it doesn't hurt to start. I think that there needs to be a memorandum going out on Monday, and in terms of technical support, Lawyers Hub can help you draft what exactly you're going through in this. Our view around the bill is that the bill ideally is too specific at this point. It's too early, and it can't cover everything. We've been agitating for like the Chinese model, where you can simply just have different legislations that handle different things, like let's say algorithmic management. China has come up with different stuff like, let's look at how different sectors handle these things differently, whether it's on general purpose AI, like the stuff that you use, like ChatGPT, it's very different in that sense. But to have just one huge bill on artificial intelligence is coming from the Senate, which does not have the capacity to make money bills. So right now it's at concurrent stage. It introduces a lot of challenges. And we've talked about this. If you go on YouTube, you'll see videos from Lawyers Hub. You can watch it and see exactly our analysis on why this is problematic. But now that the bill is there, we have no option but just to engage and see how far this is going to get us. So that's the first part. But the second part is this: you must show that there's many of you believe in these things, that many of you are speaking. You write to Parliament and ask for the clerk of the assembly for a sitting. You can send a petition to Parliament. They will discuss the petitions, and it doesn't have to be written in glossy language, because the Constitution is clear. I think at Article 19, it says that you don't have the Constitution will not give regard to technicalities. So technicality means flowery language. You don't have to know all that, but you need to send something to Parliament in that sense. So I would say yes, it's possible. For the national AI policy, it's being I think it's being funded by the UK government, and technical support is also being offered. KUGWO was part of the process that's part of the convening, the Kenya ICT Action Network, KUGWO. They're the ones who've been, convening these particular discussions. We were invited, and the conversations are ongoing. So I would try and make the connection to see if either you could be included in the processes that's ongoing. But I would tell you, for Lawyers Hub, we are open. Our discussions every week are very open for anyone to come in and school ourselves. But finally, I want to say this, Wendy. Politicians are counting on your ignorance for them to bully you in this country. We must not be bullied. Go out and get this knowledge so that you will be able to defend yourself. I also want to encourage you, and I've told the lawyers. Today I was speaking to lawyers in Mombasa, the Mombasa Law Society. I told them we must begin to sue these people, because when you sue people, they lawyer up, they start cleaning things. So we need to sue these tech companies that think that they will come in and say we don't have substantial presence in Kenya, when ideally they're making money from Kenya. It is not fair at all. And so I want to urge you, get the pro bono lawyers and go to court, and let's advance jurisprudence by taking action on this.
All right. Thank you. And I guess we'll put in more effort to do that. I will be bringing up the questions, but Marika will come back to you with this, that we have different categories of workers within the gig economy. So, and they're exposed differently to negative effects of AI-driven work organization. Which category is mostly exposed? And do we have policy frameworks that are designed with these workers in mind?
So this, Wendy, this was a question for me.
All right, can you hear me properly now?
Yeah, that was a bit, didn't quite, could you please repeat? Sorry.
All right, technology is bound to operate like this, so we take it up again. I'm saying we have different categories of workers within the gig ecosystem, and some of them are more exposed to negative AI-driven work organization. So which category is mostly exposed, and do we have policy work frames that are designed with these workers in mind?
If that's for me, then I don't, and I cannot comment specifically on the situation in Kenya. That's not my remit or the focus of what I do in the ILO. I mean, I would stress, of course, the importance of the broader decent work issues that I've already flagged as a centrality to policy frameworks that need to be in place to protect all types of workers. So, I mean, we talked about the skilling, but also the access to social protection, some of these core governance issues that are very important for all types of workers in terms of their relevance to existing international labor standards, but also how to ensure to safeguard rights and in the workplace. Again, I would stress the importance of the social dialogue process. I mean, for ILO and for our constituents, it is very critical. So it's also the process, not just at national level, but also sectoral level, and also in the workplace. I mean, that is the critical challenge, to ensure we have the right type of social dialogue mechanisms in place. I mean, I think I fully take note of Linda's point that Kenya is different to the north, the global north. I mean, of course, because when if you ask for which countries are doing a comprehensive sort of approach on some of these issues, it does some of the global north countries come to mind. But I think there are many efforts underway in countries like Kenya, elsewhere. I think the critical issue is that dialogue process, as highlighted, linking to existing policy frameworks, existing regulations. But I also think a critical part of understanding what is happening is you talked also about what's the evidence, what do we know? We still need more evidence. So I think collecting more data about what is happening for different types of workers and in different businesses and different locations is absolutely critical. So more information on what is happening is a very important input, and it should be a critical input into any policy process in any country. So to me, it's always about what do we know, and what can we learn through social dialogue and to inform the right types of policy approaches. So back to you. Thanks, Wendy.
All right, I will go straight. Okay, I will go straight to the questions that we have, and I will start with Miriam, who is watching us from LinkedIn. Miriam, thank you for joining the conversation this evening. I will read out her question, and then we can have responses from both Mr. Verick and Madam Linda, or we see how the question is framed and can best take it. And Miriam says, beyond transparency, are you also exploring how to anchor workers' rights, for example, in terms of skills development to understand the technology, and linking from the ability for workers' representative to block new technologies which they deem problematic? More broadly said, how do we build worker empowerment?
Linda, you want to go first?
Okay.
Yeah, we can. I don't know if you want me to take the question again. And interestingly, we are taking inspiration from China. So that's a point of reference from Miriam. So yes, Mr. Verick, maybe if you want to contribute to the question, and then we can come
Sure.
to Linda.
Okay. I think, as I flagged the issue of skills development, I mean, it is a critical part of, of supporting workers, but also supporting businesses. I mean, obviously, it's not just for workers. It's clearly a critical issue for business to have a well-skilled workforce. And it's a key part of the the decent work agenda for the ILO. And we work around the world in many countries on promoting skills, including digital skills. Now, of course, AI itself has now created a whole new demand for one is at a very fundamental level, AI literacy. And so overall literacy about those technologies is absolutely critical. I think all workers and all businesses need to understand the implications, because even from a business side or employer side, it's critical that all the aspects around what is entailed in often what is a bit of a black box technology, right? Using AI in the workplace, most of us don't actually know what's going on within the technology itself, right? So it is critical to have AI literacy and also have that for both workers and businesses. But I would also stress that there is a broader employment policy, as we would say in the ILO lens. Ultimately, when we look at skilling, we look at job creation. I mean, it is absolutely fundamental to see the broader, landscape in terms of what are the opportunities for job creation, what is driving those jobs, and how to ensure that, the overall industrial policy landscape then is supporting job creation more generally. So I think a key issue that we see in a number of countries, some of these things get a bit disconnected. So how to ensure there's coherence in those discussions, that it's not skilling sitting here and then workers' rights and other aspects that are linked to job quality put somewhere else. I think it's very important to have a comprehensive approach that addresses both the skilling side, but also the job quality issues, workers' rights, working conditions, and also the issues that are pertaining to the business itself, the business model. Thanks. That's my response to that question.
Yeah, I would say that
Linda, you can add on.
Yeah. I was going to mention there's an AI skilling alliance, I believe, between KEPSA and Google and some other organizations. And I saw this with Ghana yesterday. Their minister, I think, had this 1 million worker reskilling initiative with Google. So I believe a lot of these tech companies are trying to reskill workers. I'm not sure it's enough, but I'm also not sure it's a stopgap measure. We need to quickly move to update our curriculum in universities and schools. So ideally, people can come in skilled for the next phases. I would say that I was impressed by Zimbabwe's AI strategy on building AI literacy from the village level, from the districts, and also from the schools. So whatever we are facing, it's a long-term measure in terms of reskilling. But the curriculum moves very slowly. Curriculum change in many of our countries. So that's an issue. But I also want to talk about there's an opportunity to amend the Labor Act, and I think that is where the greatest opportunity lies. Today, there's an incredible, suggestion by one of the senior lawyers who said, why can't we have an omnibus amendment rather than have a standalone artificial intelligence bill? So omnibus amendment is like bringing in so many laws that can be changed. So you change like 100 laws at once and just say that in terms of labor, this is how AI is affecting us. This is what we need to amend. In terms of this is what we need to amend, rather than coming up with an AI bill that wants to fix everything and then ends up fixing nothing. I think that's something that should happen. I think one of the opportunities you guys have is to really examine, and now I'm talking to MasterCard. MasterCard has been funding a lot of this work. I have wanted to tell them, if you're talking about reskilling AI people, consider policy amendments. It's just not building people. Start policy amendments and say, how do we revision the Labor Act? Look at these independent contractors, platform workers. That is where the greatest change and shift is going to come from.
All right, thank you. We still have 3 questions to tackle. We have Dorothy from Instagram who says, what is it that policymakers are getting wrong about AI and gig workers that leads to policies that may not serve workers' best interest? I think we highlighted the gaps that we have early in the conversation. Uh, Linda,
I'll
you
just
can
say
take
this.
that up.
I just quote somebody. Last week, I was telling Verick, last week I was in Geneva and I met somebody. They work with governments across the world. And they told me, I have never seen a people so wrong, but so confident. And I asked who? They said, governments. They're so wrong about AI, but they're so confident about it. And it made me think, they're changing things, they're doing this many things and maybe declaring stuff, but ideally they still ask themselves, who is the digital worker? They haven't figured out even the people that are working with them. I think a lot of the tooling needs to go to governments, like support policymakers and regulators to understand what's going on. And that's what we start from at the Lawyers Hub. Like, let's teach our colleagues who have no idea about technology, but are actually managing people, regulating people, but they don't get where this is from. Like, for example, some people will just come to AI with a lens and say, "Oh, you people are digital workers. You're making money." Then they start taxing you without really thinking about, do I really understand what I'm taxing? Is it the right time to tax this particular sector? Or maybe it's time to incentivize so that it grows, and then it's going to give us even more money in a few years. So I would say that is the key problem with policymakers, that they might be so wrong, but they're so confident about where this is going. But I also want to make one final opportunity. There's a great course that's been launched by UNESCO for judges this week. UNESCO and Oxford University have an AI program for judges. So there's something for someone. There's an opportunity for us to reskill even around labor issues. And this might be an opportunity for you. Don't just look at the problems that are happening. This is a key opportunity for you to start things and to partner with people that are already doing these things to get us to the next level.
So let me.
All right. Mr. Verick, I'll come to you. There's a very interesting. Okay. Go ahead, please.
Okay, no, sorry. I would just say quickly then, I think what's critical for also for international organizations, for policymakers, is to see the technology not only as an issue around the technology, but it's really the link to the labor market and to labor. So, this is too often disconnected globally as well. This is part of the battle we need to to fight as well, but also nationally. So when we talk about technology, let's not see it in isolation from its implications for the economy, for the labor market, for workers and businesses as well. So it's not a abstract tech discussion, but at the same time, we, as Linda said, I think we need to understand what's happening in technology. So there is this important part of building capacity on the labor side to understand what's going on in the world of technology. So there's an opportunity to bring those things together. That's what I see. There's a lot in terms of bringing the tech and the labor together. But back to you, Wendy. I think you have another question.
Fantastic. Yes, it's actually a good follow-up question, because one of our listeners says, then what power do gig workers realistically have today to influence AI systems?
Well, good question. I think we can AI systems are being developed by large tech companies around the world. I mean, in certain locations in particular, but I think it's an important challenge for the whole policy space in terms of how do we ensure that not only from the policy and regulatory side that we're able to keep up. That's a big challenge in itself. How does that keep up with the changes that technology technology brings, but at the same time, how do we shape the use, the development of the technology and in the use? I mean, I think, I don't want to pretend that we have some simple answer on that, because I think that is really the crux of the problem, because the technology is moving so fast. I mean, I think given that pace, I think what is absolutely critical is to have transparency, obviously, to have, more information, data, insights on what's going on, so we can use that, and having strong social dialogue so we can able to bring it to the table. If we don't bring those things to the table, then it's very hard to influence for anyone in the face of that rapid technological change. Thanks.
All right. I think we'll take one last one and then take the closing remarks as we wrap up the conversation this evening. Somebody says in the audience, if nothing changes, what does gig work look like in 5 years under AI-driven systems? So the ecosystem is really changing and changing really fast. We have AI coming in and it's evolving really fast. So someone says, if nothing changes, what does gig work look like in 5 years under AI-driven systems?
I think we're all becoming gig workers every day. The number of digital workers is gonna go up because the more we use the technology, the more you're gonna have many people working in this sector. But I want to say something that I tell myself every day. I just wanted to innovate. I liked technology. I wanted to build systems, and that's how I wanted to change the world. And you get there, you realize the environment is not great for innovation. And then you end up as a policy lawyer trying to make sure that the environment is great. So some of you just wanted to make money, wanted to help tech companies, and then you realize you also have to build with one hand and defend yourself with another. So I would want to encourage you to engage in the boring tasks. The boring tasks in this thing is, how do you participate in public policy processes? How do you get your voice heard? Because you just wanted to work, but now you actually have to think about, what is a harmonized regulatory process in Africa look like? If Kenyan gig workers and platform workers are talking to themselves, you are going to lose. But if you start talking to the ones in Ghana, you're talking to the ones in South Africa, suddenly tech companies now begin to negotiate with you because they know that you have the worker power. And so you're going to take this to the next level. So I would say, speak to each other. As for us on the policy side, we're working towards a more harmonized policy framework for the continent. I think for you, you need to work together across the African continent and see, how do we talk to other platform workers and what's there in the synergy that we could build. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Verick, would you want to weigh in on that as we close? Because I'll be coming back with our closing remarks. We have about 2 minutes to top of the hour.
Yeah, just very quickly. I mean, clearly it's technology continues to evolve, right? And AI in particular is evolving rapidly. It's affecting different parts of the the economy, and so it's going to impact jobs across the labor market. So I think we need to continue to monitor that. I think it's impossible to give a single answer on what that's going to look like, but I think it's critical that we continue to have data, we have insights on what's going on, we have dialogue on this process, in order to keep updating what we know. This is not a one-shot exercise. What we knew 1 year ago is no longer valid in the world of AI, right? So it's evolving so quickly. I think this is, to me, the key message. We've got to remain active at all levels to understand both the opportunities and the challenges that are emerging through technology that is developing very rapidly. Thanks, Wendy.
Fantastic. Allow me to appreciate you both, Mr. Verick and Madam Linda, for joining the conversation this evening. That has been a packed 1 hour. To our audiences, we appreciate you for joining us and for the comments that have been brought to us and the questions that we've taken. We've had Mr. Verick Sher, who is the coordinator of AI and digitalization at our International Labour Organization, coming live to us from Geneva. Then we have Madam Linda Bonyo, who is the founder Lawyers Hub, which is a digital law organization working on artificial intelligence policy in Africa. Thank you so much for making time to join us this evening. This live has been made possible through the collaboration of Speak Up Africa and KUGWO, which is Kenya Union of Gig Workers. And as we wrap up, I just want to bring to our attention also that there is a partnership between KUGWO and Microsoft on top of the AI skilling programs that have been mentioned from the big tech companies. Microsoft has partnered with KUGWO to deliver free AI fluency courses. So if you're in the audience today and you'll interact with information from KUGWO social media platforms and grab this opportunity. Once again, thank you so much for this lovely evening and for the conversation we've been able to unpack. My name is Wendy Lois. I have been your moderator this evening with exactly 1 hour past the top of the hour, 7 p.m. East African time. We leave the conversation at that point. Thank you so much, and Baraka, thank you.
Thank you.